The thunder rolled across the Montana territory as Zara Sullivan stared at the freshly dug grave on the hillside, her son's tiny wooden cross barely visible through the curtain of rain. 18 months old. That's all the time she'd had with him before the fever took him. The smallpox epidemic of 1872 had swept through their settlement with merciless efficiency, claiming 23 lives in 3 weeks. Her William had been the youngest. Zara stood motionless, her black mourning dress soaked through, her golden hair plastered to her pale face. At 25, she had already buried a husband and now a child. The West was supposed to have been their new beginning after Thomas died in the war. Instead, it had become another graveyard. "Mrs. Sullivan, please. You'll catch your death out here." It was Mrs. Henshaw, the shopkeeper's wife, holding an umbrella and reaching for her arm. "Perhaps that would be a mercy," Zara whispered, but allowed herself to be led away from the small cemetery. The walk back to town was silent save for the squelching of mud beneath their boots and the persistent drumming of rain on Mrs. Henshaw's umbrella. Pine Creek was hardly more than a cluster of wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, the blacksmith's forge, and a scattering of homes. Zara's own cabin sat on the outskirts, a lonely sentinel against the vast Montana wilderness. "You should stay with us tonight," Mrs. Henshaw offered as they approached the town. "No one should be alone after." "Thank you, but I need to be home," Zara replied, her voice hollow. The thought of returning to the cabin where William's cradle still sat by the hearth was unbearable, but the alternative, accepting charity and pitying glances, seemed worse. "Mrs. Henshaw pressed her lips together but nodded. "I'll send my boy over with some supper later." Zara barely acknowledged the kindness as she turned down the muddy path to her cabin. Inside, the silence was deafening. She lit a lamp with trembling hands and stared at the small wooden cradle. William's blanket was still rumpled where she'd lifted his feverish body 3 days ago. She hadn't been able to touch it since. A racking sob tore from her throat as she sank to her knees beside it, clutching the rough wool blanket to her chest. The scent of him still lingered, their milk and soap and the sweet smell that was uniquely his. Zara wept until she had no tears left, until her throat was raw and her chest ached. When dawn broke the next morning, she gathered William's things, the cradle, his clothes, the wooden horse Thomas had carved before he even knew if they were having a son or daughter, and carried them to the lean-to behind the cabin. She couldn't bear to see them, but she couldn't part with them either. This would be her life now, existing in the space between remembering and forgetting. Days passed, then weeks. Zara went through the motions of living. She tended her small garden, fed her chickens, mended clothes for extra money. The townsfolk were kind in their distant way, bringing food occasionally, offering work when they could. Doc Miller stopped by once a week, ostensibly to check on her health, but really to ensure she hadn't taken her own life. "You're wasting away, Mrs. Sullivan," he said during one such visit in late June. "You need to eat more." "I eat enough," she replied, turning away from his concerned gaze. "There's more to life than just surviving, you know." Zara's eyes flashed with rare emotion. "Is there? Because from where I stand, doctor, surviving is hard enough." The doctor sighed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Have you thought about what we discussed? About going east to stay with your sister? Charlotte has her own family to worry about. I won't burden her. Then perhaps consider what I mentioned about the Wilsons. They've been married 5 years with no children of their own. They're good people who know." Zara's voice was sharp as a blade. "I know what you're suggesting, and my answer is no. Mrs. Sullivan, Zara, they need help with their boarding house. It would give you purpose, being around people again. And they've been hoping to adopt." I said no. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. "I will not take in another child. I cannot. I cannot try again." "No one's asking you to replace William," Doc Miller said gently. "Aren't they?" The pitying looks, the whispers about poor Mrs. Sullivan and how I need something to take my mind off my troubles. As if my son was just trouble to be forgotten. Her voice broke on the last word. The doctor picked up his bag with a heavy sigh. "Grief has its own timeline, Zara. But I worry you're building walls so high that nothing good can ever reach you again." After he left, Zara stood at her window, watching as the summer sun cast long shadows across Pine Creek. Children played in the dusty street, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. She closed the curtains against the sight. 2 more months passed. Summer gave way to the first hints of autumn, the aspens turning gold against the evergreen hillsides. Zara continued her solitary existence, speaking only when necessary, working just enough to sustain herself. She had become a ghost in her own life. On a crisp September morning, the stagecoach rolled into Pine Creek with its usual complement of mail, supplies, and occasional passengers. Zara was at the general store, trading eggs for coffee, when the commotion began. "Indians!" came the shout from outside. Riders coming in fast from the east. The store emptied immediately, men rushing to grab rifles, women hurrying children indoors. Zara stepped onto the porch, watching as a group of riders approached. Not Indians, she realized, but a cattle drive. 5 men on horseback, pushing a small herd of about 30 head of cattle. Leading them was a tall man on a chestnut stallion. Even from a distance, Zara could see he sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. As they drew closer, the dust of the road coating their clothes, she noticed that the lead rider was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a broad-brimmed hat shading his face. "That'll be the Callahan outfit," Mr. Henshaw said beside her, lowering his rifle. "Heard they were bringing stock up from Wyoming territory." The cattle were directed to a fenced meadow at the edge of town, and the riders dismounted outside the saloon. Zara turned to go back to her cabin, uninterested in the newcomers, when a commotion near the saloon caught everyone's attention. A young girl, no more than 6 or 7, had darted into the street directly in the path of an approaching wagon. The driver shouted and pulled hard on the reins, but the horses were startled and reared. In a flash of movement, the lead cowboy launched himself forward, scooping the child out of harm's way as the wagon careened past. The crowd that had gathered erupted in relieved exclamations. The cowboy set the frightened girl down gently and crouched to her level, saying something that made her nod through her tears before running to her mother. "That was quick thinking," Mr. Henshaw commented. "Those Callahan boys always were a decent sort." Zara watched as the cowboy straightened, dusting off his denims. He turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met across the street. She looked away quickly and headed back to her cabin, trying to ignore the memory of eyes as blue as a summer sky. That evening, a knock at her door startled her. No one came calling after sundown, not to her cabin. She hesitated, then took her father's old revolver from the shelf before approaching the door. "Who is it?" she called. "Madam, sorry to disturb you. Name's Kane Callahan. I believe these might be yours." Puzzled, Zara opened the door a crack, the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. The cowboy from earlier stood on her porch, hat in hand, revealing thick dark hair. In his other hand, he held a basket of eggs. "Found these by the general store," he explained. "Mrs. Henshaw said they might be yours. Said you traded some this morning, but left these behind." Zara frowned. She'd been certain she'd brought all her eggs to trade. There must be some mistake. "No mistake, madam," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Henshaw was quite clear they belonged to you. Said your hens lay the best eggs in the county." Something in his steady gaze told Zara this was a kindness, not a mistake. The eggs were likely a gift from Mrs. Henshaw, but her pride would never have allowed her to accept charity directly. "I see," she said softly, setting the revolver on a nearby table. "Thank you for bringing them." Kane Callahan's eyes flickered to the weapon and back to her face, but his expression remained neutral. "No trouble at all. You live a fair piece from town. I prefer the solitude." He nodded, seeming to understand more than she'd said. "Well, I won't keep you. Evening, madam." He placed the basket in her hands, touched the brim of his hat, and turned to leave. "Mr. Callahan," she called after him. When he turned back, she found herself searching for words. "That was a brave thing you did today, with the child." A small smile touched his lips, transforming his weather-worn face. "Just instinct, madam. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. In a hard land where survival often depended on looking after oneself, not everyone would risk their safety for a stranger's child. Zara nodded once in acknowledgement, then closed the door. She placed the basket on her table, noticing for the first time that it contained not just eggs, but also a small parcel of coffee and a loaf of fresh bread. Mrs. Henshaw's generosity made her throat tighten with emotion she thought she'd buried. The next morning, Zara was hanging laundry when she spotted Kane Callahan riding toward her cabin. She stiffened and used to visitors, especially male ones. Proper widows didn't entertain men alone. But as he drew closer, she saw he wasn't alone. A rangy hound dog trotted alongside his horse. "Morning, Mrs. Sullivan," he called, stopping a respectful distance from her yard. "Mr. Callahan," she acknowledged, wondering how he knew her name. "Heading up to check some grazing land north of here," he explained. "Thought you might want to know there's a mountain lion been seen in these parts. Took a calf from the Peterson place yesterday." Zara glanced at her chicken coop. "I appreciate the warning." Kane shifted in his saddle. "If you'd like, I could rig up a better door for that coop. Wouldn't take but an hour." Her first instinct was to refuse. She'd managed on her own these past months and didn't need a stranger's help. But she also knew her chickens were vulnerable. They were her only source of income beyond occasional mending work. "That's kind of you to offer," she said stiffly. "But I wouldn't want to delay your business." "No delay. I'll be back this way before sundown." He tipped his hat and turned his horse. The dog looked up at Zara with soulful eyes before following. True to his word, Kane returned late that afternoon with tools and some scrap lumber in his saddlebags. Zara watched from her porch as he efficiently reinforced the chicken coop, adding a proper latch and hinges to the door. His movements were economical, a man accustomed to physical labor. "That should keep them safer," he said when he finished, wiping his hands on a bandana. "Dog will give you warning if anything comes around, too." Zara blinked. "Dog?" "This old fellow." Kane patted the hound's head. "Name's Scout. Best nose in 3 territories. He's getting on in years, not much use for cattle driving anymore, but he'll alert you to any predators. Thought maybe you could use the company." "Mr. Callahan, I can't accept." "He's partial to table scraps and a warm place to sleep." Kane continued as if she hadn't spoken. "And he snores something fierce. Fair warning." Zara stared at the dog, who had settled on her porch as if he already lived there. "Why are you doing this?" Kane's expression turned serious. "Word gets around in small towns, Mrs. Sullivan. I know about your loss, and I know what it's like to feel alone in this world." He gazed out at the mountains, now gilded with late afternoon light. "Sometimes a person needs space to grieve. Other times, they need something to care for." Thought Scout might help with the latter. Zara felt tears threatening and turned away. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Callahan. It's not pity I'm offering, madam. Just a dog who needs a home and a coop that needed fixing." His voice softened. "The rest is up to you." After he left, Zara stood on her porch for a long time, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Scout remained where he was, his chin resting on his paws, watching her with patient eyes. "I suppose you're hungry," she finally said. The dog's tail thumped once against the wooden planks of her porch. That night, for the first time since William died, Zara didn't sleep alone. Scout curled up on the rug beside her bed, his steady breathing a comforting presence in the darkness. For 3 days, there was no sign of Kane Callahan. Zara found herself looking for him whenever she went to town, though she told herself it was merely to thank him properly for the coop repairs. Scout proved to be a good companion, quiet, loyal, and surprisingly gentle. He followed her everywhere, even waiting patiently outside the small church when she went to visit William's grave. On the 4th day, she was kneeling by the tiny cross, replacing wilted wildflowers with fresh ones, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Kane standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said quietly. "It's all right." Zara straightened, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I was just leaving." Kane's eyes went to the small grave. "Your son?" She nodded, unable to speak. "I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine feeling. "How old was he?" 18 months. Zara swallowed hard. "His name was William." Kane nodded solemnly. "A fine name." They stood in silence for a moment, the mountain breeze stirring the grass around them. Scout, who had been sniffing around nearby, came to sit between them as if sensing the solemnity of the moment. "I see Scout's made himself at home," Kane observed. "He has." Despite herself, Zara felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Though he did chase my rooster halfway to the creek yesterday." He's always had strong opinions about roosters." Kane's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "How are the repairs holding up?" "Very well, thank you." Zara hesitated, then added, "Would you Would you care for some coffee? As a proper thank you. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. I'd like that very much, Mrs. Sullivan. They walked back to her cabin together, Scout trotting ahead. The conversation flowed more easily than Zara would have expected. Kane spoke of his cattle drive from Wyoming, of the ranch his older brother owned near Laramie, of his plans to find land of his own someday. Why Montana? She asked as they reached her cabin. Big sky, he replied simply. Room to breathe. And it's beautiful country. Inside, Zara busied herself with the coffee pot, while Kane respectfully remained near the door, hat still in hand. She was acutely aware this was the first time a man had been in her home since the doctor's visits during William's illness. You can sit, she offered, gesturing to the table. As she prepared the coffee, Kane's gaze wandered around the small cabin, the neatly made bed, the shelf of books, the rocking chair by the hearth. His eyes paused on a framed photograph on the mantel. Your husband? He asked when she brought the coffee to the table. Zara nodded. Thomas. He died at Gettysburg. I'm sorry, Kane said again, and she believed him. I lost my younger brother at Shiloh. The war took so much from so many, Zara murmured, sitting across from him. Thomas never even knew I was expecting when he left. Kane's gaze was steady, compassionate without being pitying. That must have been hard, facing motherhood alone. It was. But William was. Her voice caught. He was such a joy. Even when times were difficult, his smile made everything worthwhile. For the first time in months, Zara found herself wanting to talk about her son. Words spilled out about his first tooth, his contagious laugh, how he would bounce with excitement when she sang to him. Kane listened attentively, asking questions, smiling at the happy memories, solemn during the painful ones. I think that's what I miss most, she confessed. The way he would reach for me when he woke, like I was his entire world. You were, Kane said softly. And he knew he was loved. There's no greater gift. The simple truth of his words brought tears to her eyes. She turned away, embarrassed by the display of emotion. I should go, Kane said, rising. Thank you for the coffee. Zara walked him to the door. Thank you for listening. I haven't spoken of him much. People seem to think it's better not to mention him. People don't know what to do with grief, Kane replied. They want to fix it, and when they can't, they pretend it isn't there. She studied him, this cowboy with surprising depths. You seem to understand it well. I've had my share. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than was proper. Good day, Mrs. Sullivan. After he left, Zara realized she'd felt something during their conversation that had been absent for months, a connection to another human being. It was small, fragile, but undeniably there. Over the next 2 weeks, Kane found reasons to stop by Zara's cabin every few days, bringing a brace of rabbits he'd hunted, offering to repair a loose shutter, checking on Scout. Each visit lasted a little longer than the one before. They spoke of books they'd read, places they'd seen, childhood memories. Zara learned he'd been born in New York, but had headed west after the war, unable to settle back into city life. He'd worked as a ranch hand, a trail guide, even briefly as a deputy in a Colorado mining town. Jack of all trades, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Master of quite a few, I'd wager, she replied, surprising herself with the teasing tone. During one visit, he brought a small wooden horse he'd carved. For William's grave, he said simply. If that's all right. Zara's heart constricted at the thoughtful gesture. It's more than all right. Thank you, Kane. It was the first time she'd used his given name. The smile he gave her in return warmed something long cold inside her. Word spread quickly in Pine Creek about the cowboy's regular visits to the widow Sullivan's cabin. Mrs. Henshaw took Zara aside after church one Sunday. People are talking, dear, she said, concern evident in her voice. Let them, Zara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Mr. Callahan has been a kind neighbor, nothing more. But even as she said it, Zara knew she was lying to herself. The anticipation she felt before his visits, the way her pulse quickened at the sound of his horse approaching, these were not the reactions of a woman to a mere neighbor. The truth confronted her one evening in early October. Kane had stayed for supper, and afterward, they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. Scout lay at their feet, occasionally thumping his tail when one of them spoke. I'll be heading back to Wyoming soon, Kane said, breaking a comfortable silence. Cattle drive's finished, and winter's coming. Zara felt a sudden hollow sensation in her chest. I see. Unless I had a reason to stay, he added, his voice careful. She turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes already on her. What kind of reason? Kane took a deep breath. I've grown fond of you, Zara Sullivan. Fonder than I expected to. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still grieving. I wouldn't presume to, Kane. She interrupted, her heart racing. I don't know if I can. I'm not sure I'm capable of loving again, he finished gently. Maybe not yet. Maybe not me. But I think there's room in your heart, even with all the loss you've carried. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm afraid, she whispered. When William died, it felt like everything inside me died too. I can't go through that again. I can't try again. Kane reached out slowly, as if approaching a wild thing that might bolt, and took her hand in his. Then I'll try for both of us, he said softly. For as long as you'll let me. The tenderness in his voice, the warmth of his calloused hand around hers, it was too much and not enough all at once. Zara pulled away and stood. You should go, she said, her voice shaking. Please. Kane rose, his expression pained but understanding. All right. But Zara, I meant what I said. I'll be at the Peterson place until the end of the month if you change your mind. After he left, Zara sat alone in the growing darkness, Scout's head heavy on her knee. She'd been so careful to keep her heart walled off, to protect herself from further pain. But Kane had somehow found a crack in those defenses, and now she didn't know how to shore them up again. The next morning, she woke to find frost silvering the grass outside her window. Winter was indeed coming. Scout whined at the door, eager for his morning exploration. When she let him out, he bounded toward the trees at the edge of her property, barking excitedly. Scout, come back here, she called, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The dog continued barking, disappearing into the underbrush. Sighing, Zara stepped into her boots and followed. She found Scout pawing at something beneath a fallen log. What have you found, boy? A rabbit? She bent to look. It wasn't a rabbit. It was a child, a little girl, no more than 3 years old, huddled in a tattered dress, her face smudged with dirt and tears. Oh my goodness, Zara breathed, reaching out slowly. Are you hurt, sweetheart? The child shrank back, eyes wide with fear. Zara noticed bruises on her thin arms and a gash on her forehead partially hidden by matted dark hair. It's all right, Zara said softly. I won't hurt you. Are you hungry? At the mention of food, the child's expression changed from fear to desperate hope. She nodded slightly. Come with me, then. Let's get you warm and fed. Zara held out her hand, waiting patiently until the little girl took it with trembling fingers. Back at the cabin, Zara heated soup while the child, still silent, sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire. Scout lay beside her, as if appointed her personal guardian. Zara's mind raced with questions. Who was this child? Where had she come from? The nearest homestead was the Peterson place, a good 3 miles away. After the girl had eaten 2 bowls of soup and half a loaf of bread, Zara gently cleaned the wound on her forehead and washed her face. The child submitted to this care without protest, but still hadn't spoken a word. What's your name, little one? Zara asked, combing tangles from the dark hair. The girl looked at her with solemn brown eyes, but remained silent. Well, you're safe now, Zara assured her. We'll figure this out together. By midday, Zara had decided she needed help. The child needed proper medical attention, and someone in town might know who she was. She hitched her old mare to the small cart Thomas had built years ago and lifted the girl onto the seat beside her. Scout jumped up to join them, unwilling to be left behind. In town, Zara went straight to Doc Miller's office. The doctor examined the child thoroughly while Zara explained how she'd found her. She's malnourished, and that cut needs stitching, but otherwise she seems healthy enough, Doc Miller concluded. No idea who she might be. Zara shook her head. She hasn't spoken a word. Shock, most likely. Or fear. The doctor's expression was grave. Those bruises didn't come from falling, Zara. Someone hurt this child. A protective surge rose in Zara's chest. What do we do? I'll ask around. See if anyone's missing a little girl. Sheriff should be back from his rounds tomorrow. He'll want to know. She can stay with me until then, Zara said without hesitation. Doc Miller studied her face. Are you sure that's wise? Given your recent loss, what would you have me do? Send her to strangers when she's already terrified? The doctor sighed. All right. But Zara, don't get too attached. Once we find her family, if they're the ones who hurt her, she's not going back, Zara stated firmly. After leaving the doctor's office, Zara took the child to the general store to buy a proper dress and shoes. Mrs. Henshaw fussed over the little girl, offering her candy and asking gentle questions that yielded no answers. Poor mite, she clucked. Reminds me of those Indian children the army brings to the mission school sometimes. All big eyes and silence. Zara examined the child's features more closely. Her skin was darker than Zara's, her hair straight and black, her eyes almond-shaped. Mrs. Henshaw might be right, she could be at least partly Indian. There was a half-Crow woman working at the Donovan Ranch last spring, Mrs. Henshaw mused. Had a little one about this age. But they moved on, I thought. It was the only lead they had. Where's the Donovan Ranch? Zara asked. Other side of Elk Creek, maybe 15 miles. Kane Callahan would know, he's been helping out there this past week. Zara's heart skipped at the mention of Kane. Thank you, Mrs. Henshaw. We'll look into it tomorrow. That night, Zara made a pallet beside her bed for the little girl, who fell asleep almost immediately, one hand clutching Zara's nightgown, the other buried in Scout's fur. Watching her sleep, Zara felt a swell of protectiveness that frightened her with its intensity. She couldn't allow herself to care too deeply. This child wasn't hers to keep. She would be found and, unless circumstances were dire, returned to her family. To allow herself to become attached would only lead to another heartbreak. Yet as the little girl whimpered in her sleep, Zara found herself stroking her hair, humming the same lullaby she'd sung to William. The child settled immediately, turning toward her touch like a flower to the sun. The next morning, Zara was preparing breakfast when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Scout barked once in greeting rather than warning, and she knew who it was before she opened the door. Kane stood on her porch, hat in hand, concern etched on his features. Mrs. Henshaw said you found a child. Yes, yesterday morning. Zara stepped back to allow him inside. Scout discovered her hidden in the woods. The little girl was sitting on the floor near the hearth, attempting to tie a ribbon around Scout's neck. She looked up as Kane entered, her eyes wary. Kane crouched down to her level, keeping his movements slow and gentle. Well, hello there, miss. That's a mighty fine bow you're making. To Zara's astonishment, the child smiled shyly. She hasn't spoken yet, Zara explained. Doc Miller thinks it might be shock. Mrs. Henshaw mentioned a half-Crow woman at the Donovan Ranch, Nettie, Kane nodded, and her daughter Lucy. But they left months ago, headed for the Crow Reservation after Daniel Donovan caught Nettie stealing. Stealing food. Kane's expression darkened. For the child, Donovan wasn't known for feeding his workers well, or paying them, for that matter. The little girl had edged closer to Kane, curious despite her shyness. He smiled at her. You know, I think I have something you might like. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden whistle. Made this yesterday. Would you like to try it? The child reached for it eagerly. Kane showed her how to blow into it, producing a clear, sweet note. Her face lit up with delight, and she tried it herself, making a softer sound. Well done, Kane praised. He looked up at Zara. Sharp as a tack, this one. Zara felt a strange tightness in her chest watching them together. Kane's gentleness with the child, the natural way he'd put her at ease, it spoke of a man with a good heart. I need to find out where she belongs, Zara said. If her mother went to the Crow Reservation. That's a long journey, especially with winter coming. Kane frowned. The reservation's a good 100 miles north of here. Then what do you suggest? Kane thought for a moment. Sheriff Burton knows most folks in the county. Let's start there. If he doesn't recognize her, we could try the mission school in Helena. They keep records of Indian children. Zara nodded, relieved to have a plan. Would you come with me to speak to the sheriff? He might listen more readily to a man. Of course, Kane agreed. Though I've never known you to need help making yourself heard, Mrs. Sullivan. There was a warmth in his voice that made her flush. I'll get the cart ready. Sheriff Burton was a gruff man with a walrus mustache and skeptical eyes. He studied the little girl, who clung to Zara's skirts as they stood in his small office. No reports of missing children, he said finally. Could be from one of the outlying homesteads. Or could be Indian. Hard to tell with half-breeds. Kane's jaw tightened at the callous term. She's a child, Sheriff. Someone must be looking for her. Maybe, maybe not. The sheriff scratched his chin. Indians sometimes abandon sickly young aunts. Or she could be an orphan. Fever took plenty last winter on the reservation. She's not sickly, Zara protested. Just hungry and frightened. And she has bruises, Sheriff. Someone hurt her. Sheriff Burton's expression hardened. I'll make inquiries. In the meantime, I suppose she can stay with you, Mrs. Sullivan. Unless you'd prefer I take her to the orphanage in Helena? No, Zara said quickly, tightening her hold on the child's hand. She can stay with me until we find her family. Outside the sheriff's office, Kane helped Zara and the child into the cart. I don't trust Burton to look very hard, he said quietly. Man's never had much use for Indians, mixed blood or otherwise. Then we'll look ourselves, Zara decided. I won't see her sent to an orphanage if there's family out there missing her. Kane's expression was admiring. I'll ask at the Donovan Ranch, see if anyone knows more about where Nettie might have gone. And I can send a letter to the Indian agent at the reservation. Thank you, Kane. Zara met his eyes, allowing her gratitude to show. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come by this morning. You'd have managed, he said with confidence. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Zara Sullivan. As they parted ways in town, Kane bent down to the little girl. You take care of Mrs. Sullivan and scout for me. All right. He handed her another small carved animal, a rabbit this time. The child took it with a solemn nod, then surprised them both by reaching up to touch Kane's cheek with her small hand. Something unspoken passed between them, a moment of connection that made Zara's heart twist with unexpected emotion. That night, as Zara tucked the child into her makeshift bed, the little girl spoke for the first time. Lily, she whispered, pointing to herself. Zara's eyes widened. Your name is Lily? The child nodded, then pointed to the wooden rabbit. Kane. Yes, Kane gave you that. Zara smiled, overjoyed to hear her voice at last. It was very kind of him. Lily nodded again, then curled up with the rabbit clutched to her chest and closed her eyes. Zara sat beside her, stroking her hair until her breathing deepened in sleep. A name was a start. Tomorrow they would try to learn more where she came from, how she ended up alone in the woods, who had hurt her. But for tonight, it was enough to know that Lily had begun to trust them. The next week brought a routine that was both familiar and new to Zara. She rose early to make breakfast, helped Lily wash and dress, and tended to her chores with the little girl following her like a shadow. Lily spoke more each day, though her vocabulary was limited and she mixed English words with what Zara assumed were Crow phrases. Kane visited daily, often bringing small gifts, a ribbon for Lily's hair, a jar of honey, once even a doll he'd traded for at the general store. Each time, Lily ran to greet him with increasing excitement, and each time, Zara felt her own heart lighten at the sight of him. They learned, piece by piece, fragments of Lily's story. Her mother was indeed Nettie, who had worked at the Donovan Ranch. Her father, Lily indicated with gestures and broken words, was a white man who had gone away. There had been a new man after that, one who was mean, who hit her mother and sometimes Lily too. She ran away, Lily explained in her simple way. Bad man chase. Your mother ran away from the bad man? Zara clarified. And he chased you? Lily nodded vigorously. Hide in trees. Mama say stay. Mama fight bad man. Her little face crumpled. Mama no come back. Zara exchanged a horrified glance with Kane, who had been teaching Lily to whittle a stick with a dull knife. The implication was clear. Nettie had confronted her pursuer to give her daughter time to hide, and something had gone terribly wrong. How long were you hiding, Lily? Kane asked gently. Lily held up 3 fingers. Son sleep 3 times. 3 days alone in the wilderness. The thought made Zara's blood run cold. She pulled Lily into a protective embrace. You're very brave, Lily. So brave. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Kane and Zara sat on the porch, talking in low voices. If what she's saying is true, her mother could be. Kane didn't finish the sentence. I know. Zara wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. But we need to be certain. She could be mistaken or confused. Children sometimes, Zara. Kane interrupted gently. I rode out to where you found her today, followed Scout's nose. There are signs of a struggle about a half-mile north, near the creek. And he hesitated. Tell me, she insisted. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to worry. And drag marks leading to the water. Zara closed her eyes, sick at the implication. Did you tell the sheriff? Yes. He's organizing a search party for tomorrow. Kane's face was grim in the fading light. If her mother was killed, we need to find the man responsible. And if she was, what happens to Lily? Zara's voice caught. She has no one. Kane was quiet for a long moment. She has you, he finally said. At least for now. The search party found Nettie's body the next day, half submerged in a deep pool of the creek, weighted down with rocks. She had been beaten and stabbed. The evidence pointed to Jacob Wheeler, a ranch hand known for his violent temper, who had been seen leaving the Donovan ranch the same day Nettie disappeared. Sheriff Burton organized a posse to track him down. Zara didn't tell Lily immediately, unsure how to explain such a terrible truth to a child so young. But children had an uncanny sense for when adults were hiding something. That night, as Zara brushed her hair before bed, Lily looked up at her with knowing eyes. "Mama with angels?" she asked simply. Tears filled Zara's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. "Like your baby?" "Yes," Zara whispered. "Like William." The child climbed into Zara's lap and wrapped her arms around her neck. They held each other, sharing a grief that transcended words, age, and blood. The next morning, Judge Hadley arrived from Helena to discuss Lily's future. As the only law representative in the territorial circuit, he had authority over orphan children. Zara sat stiffly in her best dress as the elderly judge examined documents at her kitchen table. "The child is half Crow," he stated, peering at Lily over his spectacles. "By rights, she should be returned to the tribe." "She doesn't know them," Zara protested. "She's never lived on the reservation." "Nevertheless, it's territorial policy for Indian children to be placed with their people when possible." The judge shuffled his papers. "Of course, the journey would be difficult this close to winter. She could be placed temporarily at the mission school until spring." "No," Zara said firmly. "Lily stays with me." Judge Hadley raised his eyebrows. "Mrs. Sullivan, you have no legal claim to this child. I found her. I've been caring for her. She trusts me." Zara leaned forward. "Judge Hadley, she's already lost everything. Would you take her from the only security she knows right now?" The judge removed his spectacles, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Your concern does you credit, Mrs. Sullivan. But a single woman, recently bereaved. Are you certain you're prepared for the challenges of raising a child, particularly one with her background?" The implication stung. "Her background is irrelevant to me, Judge. Lily is a child who needs love and stability. I can provide both." "Even so, there are procedures." A knock at the door interrupted them. Kane entered, hat in hand, looking surprisingly formal in a clean shirt and vest. "Judge Hadley, Mrs. Sullivan, I hope I'm not intruding." "Mr. Callahan was just leaving," the judge began. "Actually," Kane said, stepping fully into the room, "I believe my input might be relevant to your discussion." He turned to Zara, something unreadable in his eyes. "If you'll permit me?" Confused but curious, Zara nodded. Kane addressed the judge directly. "Sir, I understand you're concerned about Mrs. Sullivan's situation as a widow. That's why I've come to inform you of our intention to marry." Zara barely suppressed a gasp. Judge Hadley looked equally surprised. "Is this true, Mrs. Sullivan?" the judge asked. Kane's eyes held hers, a question in them despite his confident words. In that moment, Zara understood what he was offering, not just himself, but a solution, a way to keep Lily with her. It was both selfless and presumptuous, terrifying and tempting. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Mr. Callahan has asked for my hand, and I've accepted." The judge studied them both, skepticism evident in his expression. "This is rather sudden, isn't it?" "Not at all," Kane replied smoothly. "Mrs. Sullivan and I have known each other for some months now. We simply hadn't made our intentions public yet." "I see." Judge Hadley still looked dubious. "And you're prepared to take responsibility for the child as well?" "Lily will be my daughter in every way that matters," Kane stated with such conviction that Zara's heart clenched. The judge deliberated for a moment longer, then sighed. "Very well. Given the circumstances, I'm inclined to grant temporary guardianship to Mrs. Sullivan, with the understanding that you two will marry within the month. We'll revisit the matter of permanent adoption after a suitable period." After the judge left, Zara and Kane stood in awkward silence. Lily had gone outside with Scout, oblivious to the life-altering conversation that had just taken place. You didn't have to do that, Zara finally said. I know. Kane took a step toward her. But it seemed the simplest solution. Marriage isn't simple, Kane. No, he agreed. But sometimes it's right. He took her hands in his. Zara, I won't hold you to this if it's not what you want. We can tell the judge we've reconsidered. And Lily? She'd be sent away. Kane's expression was pained. Probably. At least until we could find another way. Zara pulled her hands away and walked to the window. Outside, Lily was showing Scout how to sit up for a treat, her face alight with laughter. In just a week, this child had brought life back into Zara's home, warmth back into days that had been merely endured rather than lived. I can't lose her, Zara whispered. I know it's selfish. She's not mine to keep. But Kane, I can't watch another child taken from me. Kane came to stand beside her. It's not selfish to love, Zara. And Lily needs you as much as you need her. But marriage? To a man I barely know? You know me better than you think, he said quietly. And I know you, your strength, your kindness, your fierce heart. I meant what I said before. I care for you, Zara. Deeply. This may not be how either of us imagined finding a spouse, but that doesn't mean it can't work. Zara turned to face him. And if I can't? If my heart isn't ready to? Then we'll be partners, Kane finished. Friends raising a child together. And if someday your feelings change, well. His smile was gentle. I'm a patient man. The solution was both practical and terrifying. Marry Kane, keep Lily, create a semblance of the family she'd lost. But could she truly bind herself to a man without loving him as a wife should? Would that be fair to either of them? I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Kane picked up his hat. I'll come by tomorrow. Whatever you decide, Zara, I'll respect it. After he left, Zara called Lily inside. The little girl bounded up the steps, cheeks flushed from play. Kane gone? She asked, looking around in disappointment. He had to go, sweetheart. But he'll be back tomorrow. Zara knelt to her level. Lily, would you like to stay here with me? Not just for now, but for always. Lily's eyes widened. Forever and ever? Forever and ever, Zara confirmed, her throat tight. And Scout too. Zara laughed despite her tumultuous emotions. Yes, and Scout too. Lily threw her arms around Zara's neck. Yes, stay with Zara. And Kane come visit. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Zara sat on a chair, pulling Lily onto her lap. Kane might come to live with us. He and I might get married. Lily considered this with surprising seriousness for a 3-year-old. Like a papa? Yes, like a papa. A slow smile spread across Lily's face. Kane is nice. He makes toys and doesn't shout. And he looks at you like the prince looks at the princess in the story. Zara blinked, startled by the child's perception. Does he? Lily nodded solemnly. With happy eyes. That night, Zara lay awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, turning the decision over in her mind. Marriage to Kane would solve their immediate problem. Lily could stay, and they would provide her a stable home. But marriage was meant to be more than a practical arrangement. It was supposed to be about love, about building a life together because you couldn't imagine living apart. After Thomas died, Zara had resigned herself to being alone. Then William came, filling her world with purpose and joy. When she lost him too, she believed that part of her life was over the part where she loved and was loved in return. She'd walled herself off, determined never to be so vulnerable again. But in the past weeks, cracks had appeared in those walls. Kane's kindness, his quiet strength, the way he seemed to understand her grief without trying to fix it, these things had touched her in ways she hadn't expected. And Lily, with her resilience and trust, had reminded Zara that her heart wasn't dead after all, just carefully guarded. Could she take this risk? Could she open herself to the possibility of love again, knowing it might lead to more pain? As dawn broke over the mountains, Zara made her decision. Kane arrived mid-morning, his expression carefully neutral as Zara met him on the porch. Lily was inside, occupied with a picture book Zara had found among William's things. I've been thinking all night, Zara began without preamble. And Kane's voice was steady, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. I can't make you any promises about my heart, Kane. I don't know if I'll ever feel the way a wife should about her husband. But I do know that I respect you, and I trust you, which is more than many marriages begin with. Hope flickered in his eyes. Is that a yes? It's a yes with conditions, Zara clarified. First, This is for Lily. Everything we do must be in her best interest. Second, I need time. Time to adjust, time to see what my feelings might become. And third, if either of us becomes unhappy in this arrangement, we find another solution for Lily together. I won't have her raised in a home without affection. Kane nodded, considering her words. Fair terms. I have one condition of my own, which is that you promise to be honest with me, always, about your feelings, your fears, your needs. A marriage built on politeness rather than truth won't serve any of us well. Zara appreciated his directness. I promise. Then I accept your conditions, Mrs. Sullivan. Kane's smile was tentative but warm. Shall we tell Lily? The little girl's reaction was pure joy. She danced around the cabin, repeating Kane stay, until Scout joined her excitement, barking and wagging his tail. Watching them, Zara felt a cautious hope unfurl inside her. This wasn't the life she had planned, but perhaps it could be a good one nonetheless. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Pine Creek. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, with Mrs. Henshaw and Doc Miller as witnesses. Lily stood between them, holding both their hands, wearing a new dress that Mrs. Henshaw had helped Zara sew. Scout waited patiently outside, a ribbon tied to his collar for the occasion. The vows were simple, traditional. When Kane placed the plain gold band on her finger, his mother's, he told her Zara felt a curious mix of anxiety and peace. This was right for Lily, she reminded herself. The rest would sort itself out in time. That evening, after a small celebration at the Henshaw home, they returned to Zara's cabin, their cabin now. Kane had brought his few possessions earlier that day: clothes, books, tools, a fine saddle, and a small chest of mementos from his travels. They stood awkwardly in the main room, the reality of their new situation suddenly very present. I can sleep in the lean-to, Kane offered, sensing her discomfort. At least until— No, Zara interrupted. You're my husband now. This is your home. I won't have you sleeping with the garden tools. She managed a small smile. The bed is large enough for both of us. Lily, exhausted from the excitement of the day, fell asleep quickly in her new trundle bed that Kane had built beside theirs. As Zara prepared for bed behind a screen, she tried to calm her racing heart. This wasn't her wedding night with Thomas, full of love and nervous anticipation. This was something entirely different, a beginning based on practicality and shared purpose. When she emerged in her nightgown, Kane was sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed except for his boots. I thought I'd wait until you were settled, he explained. I can turn down the lamp while you get comfortable. His consideration touched her. Thank you. They lay side by side in the darkness, a careful distance between them, listening to Lily's soft breathing and Scout's occasional snores from his place by the hearth. Zara, Kane whispered after a long silence. I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I understand this isn't a traditional marriage. I won't press for marital rights. Not until you're ready. If ever. His words eased a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged. Thank you, she whispered back. But Kane, someday I might. I hope I will. He reached across the space between them and found her hand. Someday, he agreed. For now, this is enough. The days turned to weeks, and gradually, they developed a rhythm to their new life together. Kane found work helping nearby ranchers prepare for winter, returning each evening with stories that made Lily laugh and Zara smile, despite herself. Zara continued her mending work and taught Lily simple letters and numbers. On Sundays, they attended church together, ignoring the curious glances and whispers from some of the townspeople. At night, they shared the bed chastely, though sometimes Zara would wake to find Kane's arm draped protectively over her waist, or her own head resting on his shoulder. She found these unconscious intimacies less frightening than she'd expected. As November turned to December, snow blanketed Pine Creek in pristine white. Kane built a sled for Lily and taught her to make snow angels. They gathered pine boughs to decorate the cabin and prepared for Christmas, Lily's first in a proper home, and Zara and Kane's first as a family. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Lily had gone to bed, Kane broached a subject they'd been avoiding. I've been thinking about our future, he began. Come spring, I should look for more permanent work. Zara nodded. The ranch hands will be hiring then. Actually, I was thinking of something else. Kane leaned forward, his expression earnest. There's a small ranch for sale about 10 miles north of here. Peterson told me about it belongs to an old trapper who's moving to Oregon to live with his daughter. It's not much a cabin, a barn, about 50 acres. But it's good land with a year-round stream. You want to buy a ranch? Zara was surprised. Can we afford that? Kane smiled at her use of we. I've been saving for years. Almost bought land in Wyoming last year, but something held me back. Now I'm glad it did. He took her hand. What do you think? A fresh start, a place of our own to raise Lily, maybe even add to our family someday. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying. It's a big step, Zara said cautiously. Life is made of big steps, Zara. Sometimes we choose them, sometimes they choose us. Kane's eyes held hers. But I think we could build something good there. Something that lasts. She studied his face in the firelight, the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his jaw, the slight smile that always seemed ready to break through. In the weeks they'd been married, she'd come to rely on his steady presence, his unwavering support, his gentle way with Lily. She'd come to care for him, perhaps more than she was ready to admit. All right, she agreed. Let's look at it at least. Kane's smile broadened. We'll ride out tomorrow, if the weather holds. The small ranch was exactly as Kane had described, modest, but full of potential. The cabin was sturdy, built by a man who knew how to withstand Montana winters. The barn needed repairs, but was sound. The land rolled gently down to a clear stream, with good pasture for cattle and horses, and rich soil for a kitchen garden. As Lily explored the yard with Scout, Kane showed Zara his vision where they could plant an orchard, how they could expand the cabin as their family grew, the riding lessons he would give Lily when she was older. You've thought of everything, Zara said, watching him gesture enthusiastically. I've had these dreams a long time, Kane admitted. Just never had anyone to share them with before. Something shifted in Zara's heart at his words. This man, who had entered her life so unexpectedly, who had married her to help a child neither of them knew, was offering her not just security, but a future filled with possibility. That night, as they prepared for bed, Zara found herself watching Kane, the careful way he folded his clothes, the gentleness with which he tucked Lily in, the quiet strength in his movements. When he turned and caught her looking, she didn't glance away as she usually did. Kane, she said softly, taking a step toward him. I'd like to try. His brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. Zara, are you sure? There's no rush. I told you I'd wait, I know. She took another step, close enough now to feel the warmth radiating from him. But I don't want to wait anymore. Not because I feel obligated, but because I want to. Because I care for you, Kane. More than I expected to. More than I thought I could. Kane's hand trembled slightly as he reached to touch her face. I've been falling in love with you since the day I brought those eggs to your door, he confessed. But I never wanted to pressure you. Never wanted you to feel you had to return my feelings. I don't know if what I feel is love yet, Zara whispered honestly. But I want to find out. With you. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, her arms sliding around his neck, he deepened the kiss, drawing her closer. Years of loneliness and grief began to melt away in the warmth between them. Later, lying in his arms, Zara felt a peace she hadn't known since before Thomas left for war. This wasn't a betrayal of her past, she realized, but a continuation of her life. Thomas would always be her first love, William her first child. But here, now, with Kane's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek and Lily sleeping soundly nearby, she had been given a second chance at happiness. What are you thinking? Kane murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. That I'm grateful, she replied. For you. For Lily. For the chance to try again when I thought that part of my life was over. Kane pressed a kiss to her forehead. Remember what I told you that day on your porch? That I'd try for both of us. Zara nodded against his chest. I meant it, he continued. And I always will. Whatever comes, Zara, we face it together. Together, she echoed. And for the first time in a very long time, the word didn't fill her with fear, but with hope. Spring came early to Montana that year. By March, the snow was melting, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the dark earth. On a clear, crisp morning, Zara, Kane, and Lily loaded their belongings into a wagon and bid farewell to the cabin where so much had happened. Zara paused at William's grave, placing fresh flowers beside the small wooden cross and the carved horse Kane had made. "I'll always love you, my sweet boy," she whispered. "And I'll always remember. But I'm going to live now, too. I think you would want that." As they approached their new home, Lily bouncing with excitement in the wagon seat between them, Scout running ahead, Zara felt a surge of joy so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," Kane said, reaching for her hand. Zara laced her fingers through his, feeling the solid strength of his grip, the promise in his touch. "Home," she repeated, the word no longer an empty sound but filled with meaning once more. As they crested the final hill, the small ranch came into view, bathed in spring sunshine. It wasn't grand or imposing, but it was there's a place to heal, to grow, to build a future together. "Look, Lily," Kane said, pointing to a distant hill where wildflowers had begun to bloom. "Come summer, that whole meadow will be full of colors. Can we pick them?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. "All you want," Zara promised. "And we'll plant more in our garden. Roses and daisies and sunflowers tall as Kane." Lily giggled at the image. At 4 years old now, she was thriving talking in full sentences, learning her letters, growing stronger every day. The court had made their guardianship permanent in February, with Judge Hadley noting the remarkable improvement in the child's welfare under their care. As Kane helped them down from the wagon, Lily ran to explore their new yard, Scout at her heels. Zara stood for a moment, taking in the scene her husband, her daughter, their home. The path that had led her here had been marked by unimaginable loss, but also by unexpected joy. Kane came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking. Zara leaned into his embrace. "No. For the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you. I was waiting for the right moment, and this seems like it." Zara felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" Kane took both her hands in his. "I know when we married, it was for Lily's sake. And I know you said you weren't sure if you could love again." "Kane, let me finish," he said gently. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Watching you with Lily, sharing your bed, your table, your thoughts, I fall more in love with you every day." His voice grew husky with emotion. "And I wanted you to know that even if you never feel the same way, what we have is enough for me. More than enough." Tears filled Zara's eyes. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes, the curve of his mouth that she had come to know so well. "Kane Callahan," she said softly, "I do love you. Not the same way I loved Thomas. That was a girl's first love, sweet and simple. What I feel for you is deeper, harder one. You came into my life when I thought all joy had left it, and you showed me how to hope again, how to try again." She smiled through her tears. "And I have something to tell you too." "What's that?" he asked, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Zara guided his hand to her stomach, still flat, but harboring their secret. "Come autumn, our family will be a little larger." Kane's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to radiant joy. "A baby? You're certain?" She nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "Careful," she protested, though she was laughing too. "I'm in a delicate condition, or so Doc Miller tells me." Kane set her down gently, but kept his arms around her. "Are you happy about it?" "I know after William, I'm terrified," Zara admitted. "And overjoyed. And grateful." She rested her forehead against his. "Mostly grateful. For you, for Lily, for this second chance I never thought I'd have." From across the yard, Lily called to them, eager to show them a nest of rabbits she'd discovered behind the barn. Hand in hand, they went to join their daughter, ready to begin this new chapter together. 9 years later, Zara sat on the wide porch of their expanded home, watching Kane teach their youngest son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. At 6, Thomas had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Beside them, 8-year-old James offered advice while holding the lead rope, his freckled face serious with responsibility. Lily, now 13 and blooming into a beautiful young woman, sat on the porch steps sketching the scene. Her talent for art had emerged early, nurtured by both parents who ensured she had proper paper and pencils ordered from as far away as Chicago. "Mama, look," Thomas called as he balanced on the pony's back, without holding the saddle. "I'm doing it." "Wonderful, darling," Zara called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. Scout, now elderly and gray-muzzled, dozed at her feet, occasionally thumping his tail when the boys' excited voices rose. He had been joined over the years by 2 more dogs, but remained Lily's special companion. The Callahan ranch had prospered under Kane's careful management and Zara's practical support. What had begun as 50 acres and a few head of cattle had grown to 300 acres and a respectable herd. They weren't wealthy by Eastern standards, but they were comfortable, their children well fed and educated, their home warm and welcoming. As Zara watched her family, she thought of the woman she had been a decade ago, broken by grief, determined never to risk her heart again. How much she would have missed if she hadn't found the courage to try once more. Kane glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 9 years of marriage, his smile still quickened her pulse. He said something to the boys, then walked toward the porch, his stride easy and confident. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. "About beginnings," she replied, "and how they sometimes come disguised as endings." Kane took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "Philosophical today, aren't we?" "Blame the letter from Mrs. Henshaw," Zara said, nodding toward the open envelope on the small table beside her. "She writes that the Donovan place is for sale." Old Donovan finally drank himself to death. Kane's expression darkened momentarily. They had learned years ago that Jacob Wheeler, the man who killed Lily's mother, had been hired by Donovan himself, who had been furious at Nettie for leaving his employ and spreading word of his mistreatment. Wheeler had been caught and hanged in Helena, but Donovan had escaped justice due to lack of evidence. "Good riddance," Kane muttered, then glanced at Lily to make sure she hadn't heard. The girl knew the truth about her mother's death. They had told her when she was old enough to understand, but they tried to shield her from the darker details. "I was thinking," Zara continued, "about how if William hadn't died, if I hadn't shut myself away in grief, if you hadn't brought those eggs to my door, how different everything would be." Kane squeezed her hand. "I used to believe things happened for a reason. Now I think reasons are what we make of the things that happen to us. You could have let grief consume you, but you chose to love again. I could have kept drifting, but I chose to build a home with you. We chose each other," Zara agreed. "And Lily, and this life. Any regrets?" Kane asked, his tone light, though she knew the question was serious. Zara looked out at their children, James, now taking his turn on the pony, Thomas cheering him on, Lily capturing it all in her sketch. She thought of the small grave on the hill behind their old cabin, which they still visited every spring to place flowers. She thought of Thomas, her first husband, who would always have a place in her heart. And she thought of the moment she had said, "I can't try again," and the man beside her who had gently, persistently shown her that she could. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Kane leaned over to kiss her, a brief but tender gesture. "I love you, Zara Callahan." "And I love you," she replied, the words as true now as the first time she'd spoken them. "For always." From the yard, their sons called for them to watch a new trick. Hand in hand, they rose to join their children in the golden afternoon light, their journey continuing together, one day at a time.